Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV and Roku TV's World Edition. And I greet you live from the All America city of Morrisville, actually PBS Carolinas, as I gave my response to the governor's State of the State address on one of the show's Black Issues Forum. We also talked about Medicaid expansion, which is very interesting. North Carolina, one of the few states yet to do it, but they made a deal in the Senate last week. Billions of dollars at stake. It's going to cost North Carolina about $500 million a month if we don't do it. But the money is not retroactive, and so the sooner they act, the better. But the Republicans want to wait until the budget is voted on, so this could be an issue moving forward. We talked about that. We talked about mental health, and we talked about the North Carolina governor's race, Mark Robinson, who was endorsed by Trump last year and is a real conservative rogue here in North Carolina, making a lot of waves. But today, I want to begin just giving a couple of things we're going to talk about today. 3 years ago today, the global coronavirus pandemic was actually declared a global pandemic, and more than 1.1 million people have died in the U.S. and thousands more dealing with long-term COVID. Much of normal life stopped on March 11, 2020. I think all of us can remember that, and it's hard to believe that we've come out of it, but also it changed the world, it changed all of us, and we're going to talk a little bit about our reflections of COVID. Donald Trump was invited to testify for a grand jury in New York. The panel has been looking at Trump's role in hush money payments to an adult film star during his 2016 campaign. A Mexican cartel handed over 5 men yesterday. They were found blaming them for the kidnappings of 4 Americans last week. 2 were killed. And 7 people were killed last night in a shooting in Germany at the Jehovah's Witness building in Hamburg, a city in northern Germany. And this weekend is the Oscars, the Academy Award. I may watch Women King tonight. I heard it's really good. I'm getting ready to go see Creed 3 probably sometime next week. But we're going to be talking about all these different issues. And as we celebrate Women's History Month, today we'd like to have a conversation about other women out there that are doing great things, whether it's in politics, government, business, education, nonprofits. Definitely want to talk about that as well. So everybody, welcome to the show. We're going to bring in Mark Lee and our other guests, and we're going to go ahead and get moving. Thank you.
No problem. Glad that you were thinking about watching Women King. And all along those lines, I actually watched it a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago. It is a very good film and everything in that line, definitely about some women warriors and all in that space. So it's definitely a movie that I was glad to have the pleasure of watching and all in that space. And actually, there are some films that I'm watching this weekend because I actually watched one that I learned something very interesting, but I think that Lee Newton Rhodes will find interesting, and maybe even Debbie Peterson will find it interesting as well. But one of the places I work at is the Hayti Heritage Center, and we are having our annual Hayti Heritage Film Festival, which used to be called the Black Diaspora Film Festival back in the day, but is now named after the organization where it is held. But it is definitely used to promote a lot of African-American filmmakers from around the country, and definitely some that are locally based. And the film that was shown yesterday was called The Inspection. It actually was produced and stars Gabrielle Union, D. Wade's wife, and all in that space. And it is about folks that are in the LGBT community, but were going into the military, because this particular gentleman, and he was actually there and everything, and made some comments afterwards and everything. But it is about his struggles while he was trying to go into the military. Part of it was that he was estranged from his mother because of his lifestyle choice and all of that. And she encouraged him to go into the military. As he put it, it didn't exactly scare him straight or anything, because he still was going to keep that orientation that he had and all in that space. But he did serve in our military, I think, for about 5 or 6 years, and now has made $1 million film, because they definitely had the support of multi-million-dollar film of Gabriel Union folks as well. The comment that he made that I think folks leave, maybe even Nick and you will find interesting, Steve, is that they were having a whole discussion around filmmaking, rights of different people, the whole nature of what goes on, and the conversation of the transsexual community came into the whole conversation. And one of the things that he said that I know that Dan will disagree with, and I know that Nick will disagree with, but after he made the statement, it actually made a little bit of sense, because he said that part of the reason he feels that the trans community gets in a lot of hot water and a lot of trouble is because part of the term is transitioning, because they are transitioning from one sex to another, from one sex to another. And in his words, aren't we all transitioning? Because we are transitioning from old to young. We are doing other kinds of forms of transition. So he was wondering if that is not part of the problem, is that whether we want to admit it or not, we're all going through a form of transition in our life and all in that space. So it was an interesting argument to hear from somebody in that community. And I don't know what other folks think of that logic that he put out there and everything, but that was his logic, was that we all face a form of transition as we get older. We transition in age, we transition from being rural to urban and all in that space. But that was his interesting conversation, and I'm glad that Debbie's here, because Debbie is a former mayor and is involved in the political lane and all in that thought. So I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts. I'm trying to get the gentleman that wrote the film and his partner, because he does have a partner in that film project, to
Good morning, Mark. I just have one quick thought. We're talking about women who are impactful in our lives. I know we have a special day called Mother's Day, but I think if everybody, myself included especially, my mother was the most impactful, other than my, I guess, father for a lot of us, the most impactful woman in my life, and then my grandmother's second. And that cannot be understated, the importance of those two women in my life.
Well, the interesting thing that he also brought up was actually the last comment that was made by a woman, actually made almost 9 or 10 hours ago, was a woman that came up after the film had shown and everything, and was actually saying, which I think a lot of folks have, I'm very much connected to my mom, and I would not say that I have these issues, but she said that part of the reason that she was admiring the film was because it had her come to terms with her own mother issues, because sometimes our mothers aren't always supportive and all in that space, and that's what this film was about. Because the poignant line that I think it was Gabrielle Union's character had was that she would always love her son, but she would never be able to accept his lifestyle and all in that space. And that was what the woman that was responding at the end of the film was responding to, because she was like saying that a lot of women, and Debbie may even have some thoughts around this, have some mother issues because of some things that their mothers have done. In the particular case of the woman who was talking, she said she had not talked to her mother since her sister passed. So apparently there were some things that happened in that relationship during that time and in that handling and everything. So Deb, any thoughts around folks that sometimes have those quote unquote mother issues? Like I said, I love my mother dearly, and I definitely know that she's one of my lead supporters of both me and my younger brother and everything. But I do know there's some others that have not always had the best relationship with their moms and everything. But I don't know if you had any thoughts around that, Deb.
I have a lot. Well, sorry, Debbie. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Well, you almost started to cry when you started talking about mothers, because I lost mine. I don't know, 9 years ago, but it still seems like yesterday. And I wouldn't say I ever really felt I had mother issues, except at one point where my mother, and I won't go into the details, but my mother, I felt like didn't understand what was really truest and most important in my heart. And I guess that could be true in some of the transgender issues. It wasn't that issue, but, and I felt betrayed for a very long time. Felt like she really asked me to do something that completely violated who I was and what I wanted to be. And that was hard for me for a long time. And what I finally got past it and ended up doing was forgiving her, was realizing she's human too, and she did have my best interests at heart, and I was able to go from that even beyond it to other people who had been mentors and important people in my life, and realize that for all the things that I wasn't happy about what they'd done, where I felt they hadn't listened, or I had been betrayed, I needed to forgive them. They were human. And when I did, I felt so much better. My life was easier. And that whole thing about forgiveness is very true. And it was a good journey for me.
Debbie, I agree with you. Forgiving can be very freeing, but forgiving does not mean forgetting either. Some people confuse the two.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's very much the
You're
case
right.
and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think Steve thought that he wanted to make just really quickly. Women's King is a very interesting movie because it actually portrays some very strong women warriors. And I know we've had conversations on this show before as to whether women can be strong military leaders or strong in that fighting sense. I think one time Dan made the statement that he was not always wanting women in the military and everything, but there have been some nations, and that's partially what Women King is, because it is my understanding that it is, I mean, it's a dramatic presentation, so I'm not saying that it is 100% factual, but it is based on some history that was going on there in one of the African nations, and everything from my understanding of that particular movie. So it might have some kind of historical basis to what is happening and what was happening. And we do know that there have been some troops that have been definitely women-led, and definitely had some women that can be some very fierce fighters and all in that space. So definitely that is something that we know that there are even soldiers. As a matter of fact, later on this afternoon, we'll have Madeline Lewis on, and she is a veteran of the military and all in that space, and is very proud military veteran. And her show is Success for Women that she does every Friday at 7 o'clock. I can't remember the time, and all in that space. So even though that movie was fictional from what I understand, I also understand that it might have had some historical basis, and there have been some strong fighting women that have held their own. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go back. We're going to talk about some other issues after we have the guest on. But for Debbie, as we celebrate Women's History Month, in addition to our own mothers and women in our life, are there any other women leaders that you've looked up to, or other women you think that we should be talking about on the show this month?
Oh, wow. I loved, I'm sure, yes. And I really like that question, because it's something that I have searched and searched and searched over the course of the last few years while I've been working on writing. And there are actually, I think there are very few women government heroes that are historical government heroes. There aren't that many women heroines. And there are some in the movies, some of them are cartoon characters. But
Debbie, I have two come to name: Margaret Thatcher and Golda Meir.
I love it that you said Margaret Thatcher, because that's the first thing that came to mind. And I was in Great Britain when she was heralding her. She was the daughter of shopkeepers. And so she understood the importance of small business in the early 80s. And if it weren't for Margaret, I think Britain would be in a much worse place than it is now. And I hated her at the time. She came across as really cold and supercilious. And that may be because she was trying to be someone she really wasn't. She was affecting an accent because she felt she had to. She was affecting making her voice deeper and stronger and more powerful because she'd been advised to do that. And I met her in person, and she was warm, very, very warm. And so that taught me another valuable lesson, and that is don't judge that book by its cover necessarily.
Yeah,
Debbie, I've got four more for you.
I know Dan Worthington's not going to agree with me, but I got to be honest with you. When I met Kamala Harris in a private meeting a few months ago, she was so different than what I see in the public. She was so engaging and very nice and very telegenic, and just was very personable. And so I just wasn't, but then there's a tendency to demonize candidates on both sides, and maybe she doesn't have the experience to be vice president. And I think that's what Dan Worthington, the Republican.
All she has to do is talk, in front of cameras, and
that's
what it does it for everybody.
And laugh.
But I think she's a decent person. She's a warm person. And I mean, I think that she never really expected to be vice president. And maybe the role was just something she.
Steve, why doesn't that come across? Why doesn't the media portray her as that?
I don't know.
I don't doubt what you're saying. I just don't see it.
I don't know whether it's too hard when you become a celebrity. It's to find. By the way, we have Sasha Starr, who
part of it is in.
Good morning, Sasha.
Part of it is probably the way, and Debbie can speak to this. She's run offices there in California and everything, but part of it is the media handlers that are out there, and whether they're doing their job or not doing their job. And I don't necessarily think that the folks that are handling Kamala are doing the greatest job of portraying her in a positive light. And Debbie, I do have four more for you, and one of them may surprise folks.
Because everybody keeps
I would like to go back to Kamala, because I think, Raj, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Kamala is another one of those people who have a good bedside manner. She doesn't come across as warm and fuzzy. And I've met her as well. And in person, we didn't have a conversation. Well, we didn't have much of a conversation. It was an introduction. That was it. But she certainly wasn't, I didn't find her offensive in person in the same way that I find her sometimes offensive in her media. She doesn't come across well in the media. And I'm not going to blame the media. I just think that she doesn't, like Margaret Thatcher, maybe there's a bit of discomfort with the role. And that's what I guess you've been saying. But
School buses.
Another
It's the
one of
school
those.
buses.
It's the what?
Yeah, it's the school buses. That's the problem.
I'm not following why
Yeah, I'm
school
not following that comment, but really quickly, the other ones I was going to mention to you really quickly are, and one of them, like I said, might surprise you, but the other two may not. But when I think of powerful women leaders, four that just came to my mind automatically are, of course, Pauli Murray, who was involved in Brown versus Board of Education, and definitely a number of other issues. Both Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, definitely some great leaders and everything. And the one that I think may surprise folks that I will mention is actually one that is from Eastern Europe, but did a lot of great scientific work, and that is Madame Curie.
Yeah, that's true.
You're skipping over the one most famous, Rosa Parks.
Yeah, Rosa Parks is definitely.
Yeah.
Rosa
And
Parks,
isn't that interesting that in our American history, we have more African-American women heroines? I think from what you're saying and what I could look at and recall, there are more African women heroines, I think, almost than, say, let's call them colonial women.
That's
Yes.
because we don't celebrate them.
Yes, it is. I think that's a lot of it. Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that women, regardless of their color, really up until the early 70s, were still effectively considered chattel. They didn't have the right to borrow money.
That's not necessarily
They were
true.
owned.
Do we celebrate Susan B. Anthony? Because that's another name that I hear a lot of people
She
talk
was,
about.
yeah.
Women's-
There were some amazing progressives back there in the early 1900s.
That doesn't necessarily make them great or not. For example, in our church, Latter-day Church, LDS Latter-day Saint Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have the largest women's organization in the world, and it's and women led, and Utah is the first state to provide the right to vote, had the first woman congressman. Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, it's interesting. We get a bad rap. But these are women of power and women of influence and women of dignity and righteous women who choose to follow God. We don't celebrate that enough. What we do is we celebrate the liberal causes, the shrill voices in the side, all the things that tend to disrupt and make our society more unstable. And then we've got all these examples of shining angels on the hill that we don't even recognize. Or in fact, the left demonizes these women because they're not quote unquote feminists, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of things you've touched on that have touched me, and the progressive women in the early 1900s, including my grandmother, were Republicans. And what they were fighting for, and through their women's organizations, which were extremely powerful, and oftentimes the women's organizations, the Jewish ones, the African American ones, and then the mainstream white ones, would come together on causes, and they would be righteous causes. They would be looking after the widows. They would be looking after the children. They would be health care.
I love seeing, I also like observing, like conservative women, that you can just, they have their own reasons of being conservative. My wife is actually, no one knows this, but she's a moderate Republican, and actually
We know that now, Steve.
She voted for Biden, and she's not a big Trump fan. I think she might be going independent, but it's kind of interesting to see women that sometimes, one of the concerns I have is that there's just this assumption that all women are progressive liberals, but that's not true. And
That isn't true.
I love to kind of see, what makes them tick, and also Black Republicans also. There are Black Republicans out there.
Yeah,
And,
they're definitely Black Republicans. They're definitely women Republicans, and there are definitely some women Republican leaders, and definitely some folks that even in spaces that are considered overly liberal and things in that space, because I know that there are some women that have some very conservative values that are even in the media and in the entertainment space and all in that kind of way. Now, I will say that, and I was going to bring this up, but I guess I'll bring it up now and everything. I do find that sometimes it's interesting when we have people that say one thing and then maybe Nick will have some thoughts around this on another thing and then act in another way, because I want to say that it's over there.
There's a word for that, Mark.
Yeah, but I was going to ask you what y'all
Starts
think.
with an H.
There's a Tennessee conservative, I think it
Ends
is.
with an E.
That's in a hypocrite. Yeah, there's a Tennessee conservative and everything. I want to say he might even be the lieutenant governor, if I remember correctly, but he's been older gentleman in his 70s and been very active in social media and everything. But part of the reason he's been in hot water in social media is because one of the pictures that he was admiring quite actively was that of a gay man, a gay young man and everything. And he was even saying how attractive and wonderful this person was. And then he's been one of the very stout anti-gay folks within his constituency. But then he comes out with this kind of statement and social media stuff that has been going on. And definitely there's a lot of viral and a lot of other comments that are coming out on the social media outlets because of what he says and then what he does are not necessarily matching.
Mark, I don't know the particular case, but you cannot approve of someone's lifestyle, but acknowledge the good that they're doing to society at the same time.
Yeah,
but
that's been a challenge for me because there are times when I really dislike someone, and I have to concede that in fact maybe they were a good leader or maybe they did some things well. So I agree with you on that.
Our best leaders are not necessarily angels.
Well, I mean, most of our best leaders are not angels. I mean, we can look at the ones that have had troubles even in the civil rights movement and in the women's rights movement and in a number of other movements that had some, things in their closet that were not always that great in their history and everything. I mean, we can look at some of the top leaders of the world, whether that's the Jeffersons of the colonial era or whether that's the Martin Luther Kings, and we go more to the 60s. But there are things about their past that were not always that pleasant, but the family dealt with it. The family dealt with it, and I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I like to agree come back in with what Dan said. In a perfect world, I would be choosing righteous leaders, male and female, and I'm not so much concerned about what their specific faith is. I'm just concerned about their standards and their ethics and their righteousness. Because a lot of the great leaders have, in fact, been righteous.
And by the way, just to let you know the case, because I was pulling it up, it was Tennessee Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally. And in an exclusive interview this past Thursday, he apologized after the uproar over his interaction with provocative posts on social media, while insisting that his
Wi-Fi issue froze.
Oh, well.
Well, we'll be, let's continue. You're going to be here we have some other issues we're going to talk about there, but we can always move them to next week. We're going to talk about Trump's grand jury investigation. Sasha may have an update on Ukraine. There was a Russian attack yesterday on Ukraine, 5 dead. And then maybe the Oscars is this weekend, so maybe some predictions of movies that we want to see. And then the other one is the COVID pandemic 3 years ago. Today, it was declared a global pandemic. I look back years ago, I can't believe, the way life was, where we weren't going to anything outside. Everything was Zoom and virtual. How are we living like that? Do you guys ever think about that? I mean,
Steve, I got a question for you. 1 dead in Ukraine is too much, and that's horrible. But why do we concentrate on 5 dead in Ukraine when every weekend in Chicago there's more than that?
Oh, I don't know. That's just a war. They're in the state of war. So
are we. Our inner cities every weekend.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. Well, it's the elephant in the room. It's a global war.
US is at war with this crazy lunatic, Donald Trump, which is becoming a torch for the Republican Party. And in fact, he
Hey,
is
Sasha.
way more dangerous than in 2016, because at that time he was just a business failure and nobody expected what he was going to
Let's
do.
remind the
But
people where
today
you live.
he is a
You're in Canada.
quasi-criminal who
We
will
don't
be
care
indicted on several
about
points.
Donald
Well,
Trump.
you can talk as much as you want, but you see, indictments are coming. They are on their way. And without Trump, you have no party.
But
Nobody
unfortunately,
will vote for your party because the party is that of Donald Trump.
but
You
I'll
have
put
no
money. I'll put
party.
money
You can
on
yell
it.
all you want.
Donald
I
Trump-
don't
you
support
are.
the guy either.
Okay, you can talk all you want, but this is a fact.
You're right.
There
He will be
is
the
no
nominee.
Republican Party.
Don't add
There
much
is a
to the
bunch of people,
intellectual
lunatics,
content of this
believers in Donald Trump and his
Maybe
crazy.
somebody has a button we just
That's
touched.
all you are.
I
Okay?
guess we hit a lot.
Tell us how
Yeah,
you
that-
do.
And then there's Biden, who's likely to be indicted too.
No, Biden is horrible. There's no problem with that. He is horrible
But
for
he's
sure.
gonna win.
Then there's
He's gonna
Trudeau.
beat
Let's
Trump
not
in a
even
real
talk
But
about
he,
Trudeau.
but he is more or less looks and like a human being, whereas Trump is not. He is complete failure.
Here's the
He
beauty
failed
of it.
in business. He failed in
Tell us how you really feel,
House,
Sasha.
in
Tell us
two
how you really
elections,
feel.
impeachments, and so on. There is
But I
no
tell you,
bigger loser today in the world than Donald Trump.
You know
Vote
what I
for
love-
him.
you know what I
Go
love?
ahead.
Biden
Fire
versus
him.
Trump.
Fire him.
I'm in the
He's fired.
Rocky theme right now because I'm getting ready to see Creed. So I've watched all the Rocky movies this week, and I'm finishing up Creed 1, Creed 2 tonight. Going to see Creed 3 next week. But Biden 2 Trump 2 reminds me of Rocky 2, where Apollo and Rocky had beaten themselves up and they were hanging on the ropes. Remember that? And but finally Rocky got up shaking and he won the heavyweight championship of the world. I think that's the way I think it will. Sasha, here's the problem. He can be indicted, but it's not going to be enough to prevent him from seeking the nomination. I do believe Trump will.
No, not only seek nomination, he will get the nomination.
He will get the nomination.
He will get it. No doubts about
It's
that.
going to be a rematch. Guys,
Okay,
I'm telling you,
oh,
it's Trump
you see,
Biden again.
But
Trump
look,
Biden
for
again.
sure, for sure.
Is there an other vote you can choose from? So when you see Biden, Trump, is there other I can press that button?
And Trump.
You could vote for Kamala or something, you
It will
know.
be, but it won't be relevant.
Biden will be reelected. Biden
California.
will be reelected.
I'll tell you one
The
thing.
governor, you
This
know.
is if it was ever time for a third party in US, that time is now, because there are just too many Republicans just passionately hate Trump. But being Republican, if he is a nominee, they must vote for him. What else? But they will lose election because all the Democrats, independents, everybody, and even some
Well, it
Republicans,
depends on
they
if they
will
can
vote
stop
against
the-
Trump. So you will be out of
fake
power
ballots
for
from
next. I don't know
being shipped into the
what's
major
his
cities.
life expectancy. Probably he will live until 110. So for the next 30 years, the Republican Party will never be in power. Period. Until you will start
Democrats who rule for 60 years.
There
Debbie,
is a
Debbie,
new
can you
party
please weigh in?
formed,
You're our
Unity
guest.
Party.
Please. We want to listen to Debbie. Just your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I want to say I've been laughing some here, and it's not because I'm laughing at the message or at Sasha. So just make that point clear.
Sasha's a good guy.
What first struck me when you struck me, Sasha, was when Trump was first elected, and I will tell you, I don't normally go political on these things because the message that I want to put across is not about parties. It's about each of us becoming involved in our government, regardless of party. But when Trump was first elected, my first response as someone who'd lived outside the United States in Britain for 20 years was embarrassment. And I could not talk to my friends in Britain. Seriously, I could not bring myself to speak to them because I didn't know how to apologize. And I'm not trying to be funny here. I really was mortified. And so I appreciate, Sasha, your feedback from as someone, personally, who's a Canadian Ukrainian, and also a Canadian. So I think that's how the world views us, and it's embarrassing.
Look, we have our.
I'm sorry, Debbie, you felt like that before he was elected, correct?
This Trudeau.
I never liked
Trudeau.
him. I
Horrible
always
Canada,
disliked
trust me.
Trump. It had nothing to do with his.
No, I understand that,
It
but-
had nothing to do with his election. But I didn't like his reality shows. I didn't like the way he treated people. I didn't like his style of leadership. I thought
I
it was
get
a
that.
nasty piece of work from
I
day
get
did you
one.
all
like
that.
this? Did
How
you
would you
like
do? How would you give him as a, that's a report card? Now that he's not in office
was a
anymore,
wonderful
and his
institution.
policies.
Did you like it, Trump University?
Trump University.
Of course not. And how was his track record? I think that there were some things that were all right in his track record, and I can see that because I have friends who are conservative who have probably moved away from Trump now, but who pointed out some of the things that they felt were constructive. Can I tell you what they
Really got a
are?
lot done.
Yeah, I think he did to some extent. I can't say I liked all of it, but I'm not going to. It's ridiculous to say that the man did nothing right, because of course he did some things
He
right.
did a lot. He did a lot right. The trouble was he wasn't a politician, so he didn't know how to treat people, and he was rude and condescending and difficult and divisive. But as far as policy and getting a lot done, he got more done than many of the past presidents got done. And whether you disagree with, I mean, I don't want him to run again. I think, I don't want Biden to run either. I mean, both of them are symbolic of the problems in this country. They both create division. They both are relics. We need new blood. We need new leadership. The problem is neither the Democrats or the Republicans have anybody of any virtue to offer up. Mitt Romney, who is probably arguably the most noble of the bunch, shot himself in the head because he didn't play that whole situation right. There just isn't anyone of any substance that could step up and serve as presidents. And
Yeah,
that's
the parties don't encourage. Let's look at what the parties do. They do not encourage development of politicians. And I'll pick on them in California, Nancy Pelosi and Feinstein. They grab their seats and they just won't let go. And the Republican side, you have Mitch McConnell. He grabs his seat and won't let go. These people are not helping people develop. They have no interest.
I think that Trump was a surprise.
They have no interest other than themselves, and they're power hungry.
And
so
it's something easily fixed.
When he got elected.
Under
That
their
kind of,
power
I
weight.
love the term relic. I think relic is so appropriate, and it is so easily fixed. Every single one of us every 2 years has a vote. We don't need legislation or anything else. We just vote out the relics and bring in new, fresh blood. But I agree with you. There is no well, I won't say no, I can't say that, but there's very, very little, certainly at the local level, leadership training for elected officials.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
I mean, people are not asked. People don't vote out relics. They vote them back in again as thank you for gratitude. Thank you for what you did for me. Come back again, and they keep doing it over and over and over again. Without term limits, there's no end to the madness.
No, but
That's our fault. Yeah.
100%. I agree with you, but that's the way the system is. That's the way people are.
But one of the questions I've got to ask,
don't develop young leaders.
No, that's what I was going to ask. That's what I was going to ask is, and this is for both.
I agree with you, Nick. Whether we should, but the system doesn't.
Deb and Steve, what are we doing to develop young leaders? Because I agree with you that there's not enough young leadership, and where is the
we teach radicals is what we do. That's what universities are turning out is a bunch of radicals. Certainly, some conservatives survive through that milieu, but you get a bunch of stodgy professors who are liberal on the liberal side and try to indoctrinate these kids in the universities when these folks have not really ever worked outside of academia and have no touch with reality to begin with, at least the majority of them, or they are former layovers from the 1960s when they were so blown out of their minds with drugs and everything else, free sex and rock and roll. And so it's like, come on, seriously.
But can you see the indoctrination is strictly just liberal indoctrination?
And hold true to.
I'm not buying that because I think there is indoctrination on the Republican side and the conservative side as well. I'm asking the very legitimate question, which is, where is the leadership training? I do know of some organizations that do some leadership training, but I don't know what their graduation system is or how they get their leaders. And a lot of times the leadership is for that local level. I'm talking about what can we do to get that kind of leadership on a state and a national level.
You got to get rid of these power mongers that stay in office forever. And I'm going to pick on another one on the left side, Bernie Sanders. Okay.
Oh,
age 80. I'm sorry. There should be a term limit for Supreme Court justices, an age limit for senators and congressmen, 80 and out.
It's discrimination from what I understand. You're talking about discrimination.
It could be, Sasha, but I'm just going my empirical evidence.
But you know what? I think you should develop
years,
new leaders. You have to put somebody in charge. And in Republican Party, the number one choice would be Marjorie Taylor Greene. She would be excellent in charge to develop new talent.
Sasha?
And you find somebody in Democratic Party as well. Yeah.
Sasha, the government already discriminates based on age. You can't join the military, the FBI, and other organizations based on age. The private, you get sued. The government does it all the time.
Hey, age discrimination is legal in the United States. I'm sorry. So you could put a cap, 80 years old, and also put term limits. 2 terms and you're out. But increase the congressional term limit. 2 years? Are you crazy? You can't learn your job in 2 years. It should be like 5 years. I mean, seriously.
Why don't they make the congressional team 6 years like the U.S. Senate?
Johnson said 5 years, baby, and then you can do something. But 2 years? You're always running for election. It's ridiculous. So
they could make the congressional terms 4 years.
To run up the money, right? They're lining up their money for the next
That's all
campaign.
it can do, Dan. You get elected, the first thing you have to do is start chasing the buck because you got to run for re-election.
Well, you know, so the thing that I find ironic is when they asked George Washington, about whether he wanted the role of emperor or king of the United States, he said the only role I want is citizen of the United States. And I think that what's ironic is that we've now gotten to a point where these people in Congress are becoming these figures that are there 20, 30, 40 years. And, there's the knowledge. Well, we need that institutional knowledge. But once you get in and you start getting your pension, you get the benefits, you don't want to give it up. So I feel like we need to get back to getting.
And then all the corruption that comes with
maybe
it.
They shouldn't have pension benefits.
Power. These people are drunk with power. Let's get real. You've been to Washington, D.C. I think you're going again next week. They smell that. They get that Potomac fever and the drunk with power. And the longer you stay, the more power you get.
Yeah,
and
you're getting drunk with power just going.
So we got power drunk people running the country.
And Nick, would it help if if it wouldn't help if they didn't have pension benefits?
Yeah,
there was no incentive.
Have pension benefits.
Of course.
No, they shouldn't have it though. Take it away.
Oh, that would be
take it away.
But and then
what do they need it for? Come there for a short term, do your business, and leave.
For a short term,
not anyone else.
But you have to change our system. We have systemic failures, and they're not being addressed. And it's shown by show me the people after Biden and Trump and the centurions. Okay, did Biden start developing any of the young people? No, he doesn't give a rat's rear about young people. What about
he didn't care about him? He didn't care about anyone.
Trump care about young people? No, other than his own family members, he doesn't give a rat's rear about young people. And so what happens is they quash young people. And does the media bring this out? No, the media because they're stupid or they don't care.
The media's not stupid, Nick. Don't give them that. They're not stupid. They know what they're doing.
I think one of the biggest things you've touched on is that they have to spend 30 to 70% of their time raising money. Yeah. When you're spending 30 to 70% of your time raising money, how do you legislate? How do you find out what's going on? How do you listen to your constituents?
Yeah,
because it's all about the money. Because it has to be about the money.
Not.
You can't get reelected.
It's a lot of pressure.
It is a systemic.
Debbie, maybe they weren't meant to regulate so much. And legislate so much. Maybe that's the way the system was set up originally. It shouldn't be so much in our lives.
No, but Lee, speaking of systemic and other things that are going on in that space, one of the things that I've heard talked about, and that's actually what I was trying to look up and everything, and I'd love to hear Debbie's thoughts, and definitely maybe even Steve, since both of y'all are in and have been in political lanes and everything. But, one of the places that I work for is a testing grading company, and I do know that there are quite a few of the fellow readers, fellow team leaders, and other things that are older citizens. So there has been a push to actually, we're saying that we don't want older folks in the Congress and everything, but there is a push to actually raise the retirement age to 70. And like I said, I got some coworkers that are in their 80s and they're doing quite well in their work and everything. So that is one of the things that they're saying could be done to shore up some of the things with Social Security, which I know we've talked about going broke and everything, and it's actually being in a bipartisan group of folks that are putting it together, including some conservative Republicans. So what are folks' thoughts about this notion of lifting the retirement age up to 70, where it's been at 65 for who knows how?
Mark, I'm sorry, I got a question for Nick. How does the system that's Social Security, that's self-funded, go broke?
It was never
Because they stole the money.
it was
Other than
never
theft.
actually sound, Lee. It was a pay-as-you-go system. So
Right.
nobody really funds into their current.
Isn't that originally the way it was? You funded into yours, and then they just stole the funds and they took it for some other purposes?
No, you don't fund into yours. It's pay as you go. So what happens is the people that are working today are paying for the people that are retiring today.
No, that's the way it's working now. Originally, how was it designed? Like
That's how
that?
it was designed originally, and that's how it is today. It's pay as
There
you
was
go.
no lockbox?
And to give you an idea, my grandmother, who was a millionaire when being a millionaire was a lot of money, okay, she was collecting Social Security. She paid zero into it. Now, how do you do that? Well, when FDR started it, it just goes, everybody gets Social Security. And even today, they don't means test. So our young people are paying for.
Well, they shouldn't means test. If you're putting in, you should get out. But you shouldn't get out, take it out if you didn't put in.
Your kids will be paying for Bill Gates' Social Security. That is not fair. Bill Gates doesn't need the money. Neither does Elon Musk, etc. They means test all the poor people all the time, but they won't means test rich people.
Why not, Nick?
Pardon?
Why not?
Because who votes? It's the rich people who get the vote. They're the ones that buy off Congress. And that's one reason they should lift the cap. And when I told my employees I got to lift the cap because I'm above the cap now, and they didn't even know what the hell I'm talking about. I said, I don't pay into Social Security anymore.
I had a
and then I realized they never made more than the cap. So they don't know if you're a higher income taxpayer, you don't pay into Social Security once you reach a certain threshold. And it's a big fraud on the American public, but there's not enough financial education for people to realize that higher income taxpayers don't pay into Social Security.
We should have a show on that just to educate people.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, well, you have to, otherwise you're never going to change the voting system because they just don't know that there is a cap on Social Security, and that once you reach above the cap, you just don't pay anymore. So,
I was thinking about this yesterday because I have friends who have plenty of money and they say they really don't know why they're getting Social Security. They don't need it. They don't, and I think that if we were to reframe our thinking a little bit and think of it as insurance, because it is a security net for old age. If we were to think of it as insurance, we know that sometimes it pays out, sometimes it doesn't, but we all pay in. And I think that might be a more helpful way of looking at Social Security, and it might also help with the funding. On a local level, we've got the same thing when we're paying pensions for a city council or a city mayor of a city, not a mayor, sorry, a city manager who retires after maybe 10 years, and he's on full pay, full health insurance for his whole family until he dies, or she, and you change every 10 years. At any given time, you could be paying 5 salaries for 5 city managers, and there's simply no way that the system can carry that either. And that's goes into the whole third situation.
Here's the other problem, Debbie, is that in private industry where I work, 15% or less have pensions. In public service, like 100% of the federal government workers and the state and city workers have pension plans. So what happens is they are funding really, they're going to work till they die. I've already told a lot of these people.
Hey, Debbie, just really quick.
You work until you bloody die.
You want to live and check the
Hold on a
chat.
second. Debbie, really quick, I had a question for you and everything because it's based on something that I've observed. How much accountability is there in the public service when you leave from one job to another? Because like I said, I know for a fact that we had a police chief here in Durham, North Carolina, where I'm based at, is that was not seen all that great in light of the different things that she was doing and everything. she moved to Memphis, and now she's the police chief where they've been having all of that stuff and everything. And I'm wondering how much did Memphis do a background check on what her records were in Durham and everything, or they just, she entered the pool? Because it does seem like among the police chiefs that there's like this rotating pool where they go from city to city. It's almost like a baseball team and things of that nature. And I'm wondering how much background check do the cities do on each other and all in that space. So I was just wondering if you had any observations, because like I said, she had moved from Atlanta, which had its own problems, to Durham, North Carolina. Then she went to Memphis. And of course, we all know the hot water that she's in Memphis because of what happened there a few weeks ago and everything. But how much background do they even do on these?
We have had exactly the same experience in California, certainly even in the small county I'm in. And I will tell you that I insisted on background checks whenever we hired anybody in any position of management. And that was unique. And they not only didn't do background checks, but yes, at the state level, people could continue to work after they had retired, so they could collect that full-time pay retirement and then go into another government position. I'm told that doesn't happen at the national level. It is not allowed for federal jobs, but state jobs, states, I guess, make their own rules. And
Debbie, when they do that, do they eventually pull down more than one pension?
I'm not sure if they get more than one pension, but they certainly are taking, they're taking a full-time pension and working. Now,
Deb, I'm not even sure that it doesn't happen on the federal level, because one of our other past police chiefs, actually for a minute went and worked up in, there was a woman police chief that was here. She actually went to work for the Parks and Rec up in DC. So, like I said, I'm not sure how much background.
Well, and I think that
help you in this department.
Yeah, I think that she retired from a state job but went to a federal job. That might have been the loophole. From federal to federal, I don't think is allowed.
Right. Yeah, you transport to various different jobs. There was a person in my country club in his 40s, like 42 years old. He says, I'm retired. I make more than $100,000 a year. I said, what'd you do? He says, I collect 3 separate pensions from 3 separate governments that I worked for. Seriously. He goes, a lot of people should know how to do it. And he wanted to write a book. I don't know if David ever wrote a book on it, but basically, yeah, you can if you play the game right, you collect multiple pensions from multiple government entities, and then you retire at an early age. Now, let me tell you something. In elementary school and high school and middle school, no one ever teaches you this, at least to my knowledge. I didn't take my first pension course until I was in an LLM program at University of Denver Law School. They don't teach you this. Okay, they teach you to go to work, grind out your 401k, which is the most tax inefficient plan in America, because you pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on that, where pensions and profit sharing plans you don't, seriously. And then you find your 401k is not sufficient, so you work until you die. That's the American retirement plan as we sit today.
One more thing, you buy a house, and that's your biggest asset. And for many, many people, that's the other leg on that 3-legged stool.
Yeah, the only problem is, just because you own your house doesn't mean when you go to the grocery store, they're going to allow you to take the groceries out free. Okay, and that's the problem with the house. It doesn't produce any income. So you need some income producing assets. But none of this is taught through our entire school system. And this is a big failure of financial education in the United States of America. So people get out, and the first thing they do is they go, oh, loans are easy. Let me go borrow money to go to a private school that won't make a difference for me with a major that I can't get a job in. All of a sudden, I'm hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I'm crying to the government to forgive my loan.
That's Nick, just really, Nick,
excuse me, 1.7 trillion.
Yeah, Nick, real quickly, I did have a question for Sasha and everything. I know we're getting ready to do the Russian show very shortly, but apparently this came out yesterday. The Russian president, Vladimir Putin, is betting that Russian forces can prevail in Ukraine through a grinding war of attrition, and he believes that Ukraine matters more to him than us, and that's according to the CIA director, William Burns, and he told lawmakers that on Thursday. So despite morale and other problems facing Russian forces in Ukraine, Putin is very much taking a longer-term view, and that's what Burns, our CIA director, told a House Intelligence Committee. So you think he's got a point? Because apparently our CIA director is thinking that he's doubling down and that it matters less to us than it does to him, the maintaining of the Ukraine under the Russian umbrella and everything. So,
Mark, what kind of track record does the CIA have?
excuse me, he definitely has a point. And all Putin actually is playing to outlast till U.S. election in 24, presidential election. And in case that Republicans will win, then most likely U.S. will stop supporting Ukraine. And if that's happened, then NATO will stay aside, and then Putin will have an open door to Ukraine and just take it all over and absorb it, kill it, do whatever he wants to do there.
Well,
So that's basically what he
one difficult thing I get, Sasha, I get asked this question locally in the media here as well is, the billions of dollars we're spending, well, why are we spending so much money? Why can other people spend more money and other countries? And why could we invest that in the U.S. economy? But I think that the problem is that if we just don't provide assistance and let Ukraine fall, then that's just going to make the world even more unstable. So don't you think that that's kind
the
of
point is
Steve, we could do both.
the point
It's not an either or.
the point is that if US would not support Ukraine and it would fail, then US and NATO will spend 100 times more money to fight Russian invasion to Baltic states, Poland and other NATO countries. It will not even comparable. And by the way, US spent way much more money in Afghanistan and other sectors. You see, the thing is actually what I hate about US approach is that they you see, US are not fighters. They have a colossal military. They have a colossal budget of close to three-fourths or maybe even $1 trillion anyway. But they don't like to fight. They avoid fights, and not even fights because US is not fighting in Ukraine, but it could be perception that because they are helping Ukraine, they are on Ukrainian side. That will upset Russia and Putin may in turn attack US interests. There are already talk about that Alaska was unjustly rewarded to US and it should be given back to Russia. And there could be a talk that in for example, Brighton Beach in New York and some areas in Miami, there are a lot of Russians who live there, and Putin has to defend their rights. So on that point, he could ask, for example, US to abstain from policing these areas were populated by Russians because that would be human rights violation and so on and so on. And if there is a talk about that Black Lives Matter, so you very soon you will hear Russian Life Matter. That will start the pride.
Well, I mean, the whole saying is all lives matter and everything. But one of the things I was going to ask him, I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts about it, but Burns also said that he's also concerned about China. On China, he said that Beijing had not made a decision about whether to take military action to take and seize control of Taiwan, but said he would not underestimate the ambition of the current Chinese leadership in that regard or the determination. So are we going to see two countries that we are involved with in a kind of conversation on the international level that are going to be trying to take over sovereign nations that are near them? Like I said, we know what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, but apparently there is some fear that even the CIA director has about China doing that to Taiwan as well. And I'm sure there's some other countries. I've mentioned Eritrea and Ethiopia. I've mentioned definitely, we could even go England and
Thanks,
Ireland.
Mark. The point is that either one of them, China or Russia, it's no danger for the United States. Together, yes, there is one because there are two large countries with substantial arsenal, including nukes, and China is now building new submarines and nukes, and they're doing tremendous progress in that respect. So right now, even without losing a single American soldier just by supplying weapons, you can now stop countries that were threatening the world with nuclear annihilation for the last 60 years, for 3 generations. So right now, you can weaken Russia. You don't have to defeat Russia. You don't have to go to Kremlin, because Kremlin will, Putin regime will fall once Ukraine get them out of Ukrainian territory. That's the end of Putin's regime. And then there are 2 scenarios. Either it could become more sober and Western oriented country as it was in the beginning of the 90s, or it will be broken apart in 4, maybe even as many as 8 republics, which is also bodes very well for United States.
Dasha,
Okay.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said both Russia and China by themselves are not a threat to the United States, but together they are?
Yes, they are. Yes, correct.
China by itself is not a threat?
No, it's economically, yes, but not in a military sense.
Hey, I've got
Interesting.
to tease Dan about something and everything. How did you describe earlier Trump and everything? You said that you said that you found him to be there were different words you used. I think you said rude and a couple of other terms that you used for Trump and everything. I didn't hear you, Dan.
Dan, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted. I don't know what's going on with your mic. Still don't hear you.
Try again, Dan. We can't read lips. Now you're muted. Take it off.
Now you're muted.
Move your lips.
Something's going on with this computer.
Okay, well, I guess we'll go to somebody else.
Yeah, we'll go to somebody else. Maybe he's going to come out and back in and everything. But we're going to wind down in a minute. Steve, get ready to get to your closeout. Before we get to your closeout, I didn't know if Debbie had any final comments. I'm glad to have her back on again. And like I said, we always love inviting her. So I'll be hopefully bringing her back on a couple of other times as well. I know she's usually busy with her book and everything, but I will send out those invites. And whenever she's able to pop in, hopefully she will pop in.
Thank you. And I love coming, and I appreciate you inviting me, because I'm never motivated to get up at 6 a.m. to be on at 7. So from the West Coast, I'm not a morning person. In fact, I was working until about 1:30 last night. So I'm surprised I'm coherent. But my final thought, again, is always going to be come back to the local level, because at the local level, if we're training people how to be good elected representatives, and they go up the line, which often they do, we will be sending better elected representatives up the line. So I'm always going to advocate for training at the local level. But it's interesting, because the one thing I did not achieve as mayor, the one goal was to set up a training program for council members and county supervisors. And that's why I wrote my book, because I didn't get it done. So I had to get it done one way or another.
Well, Mark, I'm going to close out early. Deb, we want to thank you for being with us today. Welcome you back to the show. Glad you got up early in the morning to be with us. And it's been a wonderful show. Today, we're going to kind of wrap up the week. Next week, we didn't really talk. We're going to talk about women's history again, talk about the pandemic, talk about the economy, and then start getting back into kind of the presidential politics as slowly more candidates are getting in. Will it be a Trump-Biden rematch? What's going to happen with the U.S. Congress and Senate? And then looking, one issue I'd like to talk about is Medicaid expansion, and a very interesting issue that I think we'll be talking about in North Carolina. And what does it mean? Many states are doing it. And after Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, it became easier for people above the poverty level to still get Medicaid assistance, leveraging private insurance. So the idea would be providing access to those individuals who could use it. But there's economic impacts and money at stake. So we'll talk about that. But thank you all so much for being with us today. We'll be back next week for another edition. Make sure you tune into the Ukraine show. Mark, send me the live link, email it to me so I can share the show with everybody. And Sasha, hopefully I can come on your show one day next week or in April.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. Be safe wherever you are.
Debbie, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Y'all take care. God bless.
Yeah. I've got to get to the right one to close us out and everything, but we'll do that very shortly because somebody moved the banner.
Mark, I'm waiting to see how long Steve can hold a smile.
Yeah, let's go see how long he can hold that smile. Let's be interested.
Live from Studio East.
Studio East over there at PBS. And now I've got the right manners, and he's held this file long enough and all in that space. So let's go ahead and get on out of here.
All right.
Take
Thank
care.
you, guys.